What if I told you that centuries before the arrival of European settlers, long before skyscrapers, steam engines, or silicon chips, the indigenous tribes of North America were already building technologies that modern scientists still struggle to fully understand? Imagine a civilization where every tool, every field, and every design was carefully aligned with nature itself. Imagine people creating sustainable systems so advanced that they kept entire populations thriving for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years without destroying the environment. Today, much of that wisdom has been forgotten, buried beneath layers of colonization, erased from history books, and dismissed as folklore. But what if those so-called primitive societies were actually holding on to knowledge we desperately need today? Let us begin with the image many of us were taught in school. Native Americans with bows and arrows, living in teepees, wandering the land, surviving by hunting and gathering. That image is not only incomplete, it is dangerously misleading. Because these tribes were not simply surviving. They were innovating. They engineered farming systems capable of feeding millions. They designed architecture that could endure the harshest climates. They developed medicines and chemical processes long before modern laboratories existed. Yet their technologies are not the kind you would see in a factory. They were technologies of balance. Tools that fused science with spirituality. And innovations that treated the earth as a partner rather than a resource. Take agriculture for example. Modern farming often strips the soil, floods the land with chemicals, and creates dependence on machines. But indigenous people used a method we now call companion planting. The most famous example is the Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash, grown together. The corn provided a natural pole for beans to climb. The beans enriched the soil with nitrogen. And the squash spread wide leaves that kept the ground moist and prevented weeds. This system required no tractors, no fertilizer, and no pesticides. Yet it produced abundant harvests for centuries. Scientists today marvel at how efficient and sustainable it was. But for the people who created it, this was not just farming. It was harmony with the land. And agriculture was only the beginning. The ancestral Puebloans of the American Southwest created irrigation systems that carved lifelines into the desert. They built canals and reservoirs so precise that water could be distributed across miles of dry land. Archaeologists have found evidence of water diversion structures that rival anything the Romans constructed. In places where rain was scarce, indigenous engineers created thriving communities that flourished where modern developers would have given up. But what might surprise you most is that indigenous technologies were not limited to farming or water. They extended to chemistry and materials science. For instance, native peoples created natural rubber centuries before Charles Goodyear developed vulcanization. By mixing latex from rubber trees with the juice of morning glory vines, they produced a substance flexible enough to make waterproof shoes and elastic enough for bouncing balls used in ritual games. When European explorers encountered this, they were stunned. This was not trial and error. This was chemistry, refined through generations of experimentation. Medicine too reveals the brilliance of indigenous science. Willow bark, used for centuries by native tribes, contained salicin, a compound later synthesized into what we now know as aspirin. The Inca in South America used quinine from the cinchona tree to treat malaria, long before Europeans even knew the disease's cause. Native healers understood plant properties, dosages, and preparations that modern pharmacology only rediscovered after centuries of erasure. Yet perhaps the most overlooked indigenous technology is knowledge itself. Unlike the European model that relied on written text stored in libraries, indigenous societies passed wisdom orally. Stories, songs, and ceremonies encoded agricultural data, medicinal recipes, and even astronomical observations. For example, many tribes tracked the stars not just for navigation, but to predict seasonal cycles, harvest times, and weather changes. Some structures, like the medicine wheel in Wyoming, align with the rising and setting of the sun and stars on solstices, proving a deep understanding of astronomy. And yet, because this knowledge was transmitted orally and spiritually, Western historians dismissed it as myth rather than science. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself, why is it that we do not learn these stories in school? Why is it that when we think of ancient technology, we picture the pyramids of Egypt or the aqueducts of Rome, but not the irrigation canals of the Hohokam or the astronomical alignments of the Hopewell earthworks? Could it be that history was written not by the innovators, but by the conquerors who had no interest in preserving the knowledge of those they displaced? The truth is chilling. Much of this wisdom was deliberately erased. When European settlers arrived, they saw indigenous people as obstacles to expansion, not as scientists or engineers. Colonization brought not just disease and violence, but also a cultural erasure that stripped away centuries of progress. Oral traditions were interrupted, elders silenced, sacred practices outlawed. The technologies that had sustained entire nations were dismissed as primitive or destroyed altogether. And yet, fragments remain. In the terraces of New Mexico, in the seed banks of native farmers, in the herbal medicine still used by elders, there are traces of a brilliance that refuses to die. The question is, what else lies hidden, waiting to be rediscovered? Because if indigenous societies had ways to farm without destroying soil, to heal without synthetic drugs, to live in balance with land and sky, then maybe we have been looking at technology the wrong way all along. Maybe the future we are chasing is already behind us, buried in the wisdom of those who came before. Imagine standing in the middle of the Arizona desert. The land stretches for miles, dry, cracked, and merciless under the burning sun. Most people would look at this place and think survival here is impossible. Yet centuries ago, indigenous engineers turned this desert into farmland capable of sustaining tens of thousands of people. How did they do it? Without steel, without electricity, without heavy machinery. The answer lies in a forgotten masterpiece of engineering: the irrigation systems of the Hohokam people. Archaeologists have uncovered canals stretching over 500 miles, carved by hand with stone tools. These canals were not simple ditches. They were complex hydraulic systems, carefully designed with gradients to move water at just the right speed. Too fast, and the water would wash the soil away. Too slow, and it would stagnate and breed disease. The Hohokam found the perfect balance, creating a system so advanced that parts of it were later reused by modern farmers in the 20th century. Think about that for a moment. A society that European colonists labeled as primitive had already solved problems of water distribution that challenge us even today. And the Hohokam were not alone. In the Andes Mountains, the Inca built terraces that climbed steep cliffs like green staircases. These terraces prevented erosion, captured rainwater, and created microclimates where different crops could grow at different altitudes. This was engineering fused with ecology. A kind of design thinking that put survival first while respecting the natural world. And then there is the question of architecture. When we talk about ancient buildings that last, we often mention the Parthenon, the pyramids, or Roman roads. But in North America, indigenous architecture told its own story of resilience. Consider the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde. Entire cities carved into the sides of cliffs. tucked away beneath natural rock overhangs. These homes were cool in the summer, warm in the winter, and nearly impossible for enemies to attack. Even today, you can walk through these stone apartments, see the plastered walls, and wonder at the ingenuity that kept families safe for centuries. Or take Cahokia, near modern-day St. Louis. At its height around the year 1100, Cahokia was larger than London. Its people built enormous earthen mounds, the largest called Monk's Mound, standing 100 feet tall and covering 14 acres. This was not just dirt piled up. The builders layered different soils, clays, and sands in a way that kept the mound stable for nearly 1,000 years. Modern engineers admit they still do not fully understand how Cahokia's builders prevented erosion and collapse. How could a so-called primitive society build a structure so enduring that it outlasted European castles? But perhaps the most stunning example of indigenous engineering is found in Alaska. The Tlingit and Haida people created fish traps that worked with the tides. They built rock walls in streams that would guide salmon into shallow pools. The fish could then be harvested without overfishing, ensuring that the population would return year after year. This was not just survival. It was sustainability engineered into the very design of their food systems. A science of balance. And here is where the story gets unsettling. Many of these technologies were deliberately ignored by colonists. European settlers did not want to learn from indigenous engineers. They wanted to replace them. They introduced plows that stripped the soil, dams that disrupted ecosystems, and farming methods that demanded endless expansion. In just a few generations, much of the land was exhausted. What had lasted for centuries under indigenous stewardship was undone in decades of exploitation. Why does this matter today? Because we are facing crises that these technologies already solved. Water shortages, soil depletion, overfishing, climate imbalance. All of these challenges echo problems indigenous people overcame long ago. Yet instead of listening to the wisdom preserved in their engineering, we act as if we are discovering solutions for the first time. Consider this. NASA engineers studying how to sustain life on Mars have turned to ancient Inca terraces for inspiration. Scientists trying to design sustainable agriculture look back to the Three Sisters method. And urban planners, facing the threat of climate change, are revisiting indigenous building techniques that naturally regulate temperature without consuming massive amounts of energy. It is almost ironic. We look to the stars for the future, while the answers lie in the past, hidden in the forgotten blueprints of indigenous societies. Now ask yourself this. What would happen if we actually restored and applied these ancient technologies on a large scale? Could deserts bloom again? Could cities cool themselves without air conditioners? Could rivers flow clean and steady without massive dams? The evidence says yes. But to embrace this, we must first accept a truth that history tried to bury. Indigenous societies were not primitive. They were innovators. And their engineering was centuries ahead of its time. And yet, there is a deeper question that lingers. If these people had such advanced systems, why were they forgotten? Why were their innovations dismissed instead of preserved? The answer, as we will see, is not about technology alone. It is about power, conquest, and the deliberate rewriting of history. Picture this. It is the year 1620. A European settler lies feverish and weak, his body shivering from chills, his mind clouded by sickness. The doctors he knows rely on bloodletting, leeches, and prayers. But then, a native healer steps forward. She reaches into a pouch filled with roots, leaves, and bark. She mixes a bitter tea. The settler drinks. Within days, His fever breaks. His strength begins to return. What sorcery was this? In truth, it was not magic. It was science. A science that modern medicine is only beginning to recognize. Indigenous tribes across North America held an encyclopedic knowledge of plants, minerals, and the body. The Cherokee alone are said to have used over 300 medicinal plants. The Navajo developed treatments that combined herbs with rituals, not just to heal the body, but to restore balance between mind, spirit, and environment. The Lakota knew how to treat wounds with poultices that fought infection, centuries before antibiotics were discovered. Take willow bark. Native healers brewed it into teas to reduce pain and fever. Centuries later, scientists isolated its active ingredient, salicin, which became aspirin. Today, aspirin is one of the most widely used medicines on Earth. But for indigenous people, it was common knowledge. Or consider quinine, derived from the bark of the cinchona tree in South America. Indigenous communities used it to treat fevers, especially those caused by malaria. European colonists dismissed indigenous medicine as superstition, until they found themselves dying of tropical diseases. Suddenly, this superstition became the foundation for the first effective treatment of malaria, saving millions of lives. But the story goes deeper. Indigenous healing was not just about single cures. It was about interconnected systems. Plants were combined in careful recipes. Some treatments detoxified the body. Others worked as antiseptics. Some calmed the mind during trauma. Modern pharmacology often extracts one chemical compound. Indigenous science worked with synergy, using plants in harmony. The results were often more powerful than any single drug. And this knowledge extended into chemistry. For example, the process of creating nixtamalized corn. The Maya and Aztec discovered that treating corn with lime or ash unlocked vital nutrients like niacin. Without this process, people who relied heavily on corn developed deadly deficiencies. When Europeans brought corn back to the Old World, they ignored this essential step. Epidemics of pellagra swept through Europe. All because the indigenous chemistry of food preparation was dismissed as irrelevant. Another forgotten technology is the creation of rubber. The Olmec, Maya, and Aztec civilizations mixed latex from rubber trees with juice from the morning glory vine. The result was a durable, flexible material centuries ahead of anything in Europe. They made waterproof clothing, bouncing balls for games, and shock-absorbing sandals. When European scientists first saw this, they could not understand how it was made. Yet indigenous chemists had perfected the formula long before. Even the use of anesthesia has indigenous roots. In the Amazon, tribes combined coca leaves with other plants to numb pain during surgery. In North America, healers used jimsonweed and tobacco in precise doses to calm patients. Surgery, yes, surgery, was practiced long before Western medicine considered it possible. Trepanation, the careful removal of a piece of skull to relieve pressure, was performed with remarkable survival rates. And here is the chilling part. Modern studies of ancient skulls show evidence of healing, meaning the patients lived on for years after the procedure. So why is this history forgotten? Why are these technologies not celebrated in textbooks? The answer lies in arrogance. European colonists could not admit that the people they conquered were their intellectual equals, much less their superiors in certain sciences. Instead, indigenous medicine was labeled pagan, savage, or witchcraft. Knowledge was stolen, stripped of context, and renamed under European discovery. Aspirin, quinine, anesthetics, even the chemistry of nutrition. All were rebranded as Western science. But fragments of the truth survived, passed down through oral traditions, hidden in ceremonies, remembered in families. Today, ethnobotanists travel into indigenous communities to document what elders still know. They find treatments for diabetes, heart disease, and even cancer. They find remedies that pharmaceutical companies rush to patent. Remedies that indigenous people have used freely for generations. And here is where the mystery deepens. If so much was forgotten, how much remains hidden? How many cures lie undiscovered in the rainforests, the plains, the deserts? How many answers to modern diseases have already been solved, but ignored because they do not fit the Western model of science? Ask yourself this. What would our world look like if indigenous knowledge had been respected instead of erased? Would we have suffered through centuries of epidemics? Would we still be struggling to balance medicine with nature? Or would we already live in a world where healing meant more than just treatment? Where it meant harmony? The silence of history raises another unsettling possibility. Did colonial powers deliberately suppress this knowledge? Because a society that heals itself, sustains itself, and lives in balance with nature is much harder to control. In the end, the lost science of indigenous healing is not just about the past. It is about the future. A future where the cures we desperately seek may already exist, waiting in the memories of elders, or in the leaves of a forgotten forest plant. The question is, will we listen before it is too late? Imagine this. A vast canyon at dusk. The sky painted in streaks of red and gold. A group of indigenous elders gather. They begin to chant. Their voices rise and fall in rhythm, echoing across stone walls. The sound vibrates through the body. The earth itself seems to hum. To the outsider, it might look like ritual, superstition, or ceremony. But in truth, it was technology. A technology of the spirit, of the mind, of sound. Indigenous people understood something that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. Sound is not just noise. It is vibration. Vibration affects matter, body, and consciousness. The Hopi used low-frequency chants to create resonance in stone chambers. The Navajo healing ceremonies involved songs with precise rhythms to restore balance in the body. The Lakota Sun dance included drumming patterns that aligned heartbeat with earthbeat. But here is the mystery. Were these ceremonies simply symbolic? Or did they tap into real physical power? Recent research shows that sound frequencies can reduce stress, heal tissues, and even alter brain waves. What indigenous tribes practiced for centuries may have been an early form of sound therapy. A science now being explored in modern hospitals. Take the use of drums. Indigenous drums were not mere instruments. They were tools. Each had a specific size, skin, and tension, designed to produce vibrations that carried across long distances. Plains tribes used drums not just for ceremony, but for communication. A single strike could echo for miles. But deeper still, drumming altered the mind. Prolonged rhythms created trance states, opening the mind to visions and insights. And then there were flutes. The Native American flute is one of the oldest instruments in the world. Its haunting sound is said to mirror the human voice. Tribes believed it could call spirits, attract animals, or heal broken hearts. But when modern scientists measured its tones, they found something startling. The flute produces frequencies that naturally relax the nervous system. Slow breathing, and open emotional pathways. Was this coincidence? Or evidence of a lost neuroscience? Even stones carried sound secrets. At Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, archaeologists discovered massive rock amphitheaters where voices could be projected with incredible clarity. Some chambers amplify whispers. Others create deep echoes that resonate in the chest. These were not accidents. They were built with precision, suggesting an understanding of acoustics that rivals modern design. And the most mysterious of all, the concept of resonance with nature. Indigenous shamans claimed they could use chants to call rain, to calm storms, or to guide animal migrations. At first, this sounds impossible. Yet modern research in bioacoustics shows that sound influences plants, animals, and even weather patterns. Frogs sing to trigger seasonal rains. Birds adjust migration routes based on low-frequency vibrations. Could indigenous people have tapped into these natural systems, aligning human sound with the rhythms of the earth? Spiritual technology was not limited to sound. Symbols and patterns carried hidden codes. The Navajo sand paintings, for example, were not just art. They were maps of energy. Each line, color, and figure represented a force of nature. When a sick person sat in the center of the painting, surrounded by chants and prayer, it was said the painting drew illness out of the body. Modern psychology would call this guided visualization, energy redirection, or somatic healing. But for indigenous people, it was everyday knowledge. There is also evidence of geometric technology. The medicine wheel, found in many Plains tribes, is a massive stone circle aligned with the sun and stars. It was used for ceremonies, yes, but also for marking time, solstices, and equinoxes. Some scholars believe it functioned like an ancient observatory. But within ceremonies, it was a map of balance, teaching people how to align body, mind, and spirit with the cosmos. But here is the haunting question. Were these practices purely symbolic? Or did they embody real scientific principles? Did indigenous healers understand how sound, geometry, and vibration interacted with human biology? Did they possess a knowledge of frequency medicine? Long before the West even had a word for frequency, colonial powers dismissed these ceremonies as primitive superstition. Drums were banned, flutes forbidden, chants silenced. Christianity labeled them as witchcraft. Yet modern science now pays millions to research meditation, sound baths, and acoustic healing. The irony is chilling. The knowledge was always here, but it was silenced. And yet, fragments survived. In powwow songs, in the deep beat of the drum, in the whisper of flutes, in the chants carried from elder to child. Modern indigenous communities are reclaiming these technologies, blending them with science. Musicians now collaborate with neurologists to measure the effects of powwow drumming on heart rates. Therapists use native flute tones to treat trauma. The lost is becoming found. So what does this mean for us today? It means the technologies of spirit, sound, and vibration may be the missing link between body and soul. They may offer answers to modern crises of stress, disconnection, and mental illness. They may hold the key to rebalancing a world that has forgotten harmony. But one question lingers. If indigenous people could unlock the power of sound, resonance, and geometry, what else did they know? What other technologies remain hidden, erased, or buried in the silence of history? And if those secrets were uncovered today, would we even be ready to understand them? Picture this. A world racing forward at blinding speed. Machines hum. Skyscrapers rise. Satellites orbit. Yet, Beneath the roar of modern progress, something is missing. A silence. A gap. A loss. The knowledge of those who came before. The indigenous technologies that once guided survival, balance, and connection to the earth. Think about it. Ancient tribes developed agriculture without destroying the land. Irrigation without poisoning rivers. Medicine without chemical factories. Architecture without choking the sky. Their systems were sustainable, cyclical, and deeply connected to nature. Ours, in contrast, are often extractive, destructive, and blind to balance. What does that say about us? Have we really advanced? Or have we forgotten the technologies we explored? Agriculture, astronomy, medicine, sound, and spirit were not isolated practices. They were part of an integrated worldview. The earth was not a resource to exploit. It was a partner. The stars were not distant lights. They were guides. Healing was not about fighting disease. It was about restoring balance. Every tool, every system, every technology was built on one core principle: harmony. Now ask yourself, what would happen if we returned to that principle? Imagine our cities built with indigenous knowledge of natural materials and airflow. Imagine medicine that focused not only on the body, but on spirit, community, and nature. Imagine agriculture that regenerated the soil, instead of stripping it bare. Imagine technology that served balance, instead of greed. But here lies the haunting truth. Most of this knowledge has been lost, buried under centuries of colonization, erased by policies that banned ceremonies, languages, and traditions. Entire libraries of wisdom, never written, silenced forever. And yet, fragments survive, carried by elders, whispered in stories, painted in patterns, sung in ceremonies, waiting for those willing to listen. So here is the challenge. Will we listen? Will we honor what was nearly erased? Or will we continue down a path that leads to imbalance, collapse, and silence? For modern Christians, scientists, and citizens alike, there is a moral duty here. To look back, to learn, to respect. Indigenous technologies are not relics. They are blueprints for survival in an age of crisis. As climate change accelerates, as mental health declines, as disconnection spreads, these old ways may hold the new answers. Consider the technologies of sound. We spend billions treating stress and trauma. Yet indigenous people knew how rhythm, chant, and resonance calmed the nervous system. Consider the technologies of agriculture. We fight to repair soil, yet they sustained it for centuries. Consider the technologies of astronomy. We build billion-dollar observatories, yet they read the stars with naked eyes, creating maps as accurate as ours. The irony is sharp. The wisdom was here all along. We dismissed it. We destroyed it. And now, we are desperate to rediscover it. But here is where you come in. Yes. You. The listener. The viewer. The seeker. You are part of this story. Because the first step to reclaiming lost knowledge is remembering. Asking. Seeking. Sharing. The more we talk about these forgotten technologies, the less forgotten they become. The more we honor indigenous voices, the louder they echo against the silence of history. So I ask you, what do you think? Did indigenous people unlock truths about the universe we still cannot understand? Were their spiritual and practical technologies more advanced than we realize? Could they hold keys to our survival? Or even our future? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Share your theories. Add your voice to the conversation. And if this story shook something inside you, if it made you wonder, if it opened your mind, then make sure you subscribe. Because here, we uncover the hidden, the erased, the forgotten. And together, we bring the truth back to light. This is not just history. This is a call to action. A reminder that wisdom does not always come from the newest machines or the brightest labs. Sometimes, it comes from voices carried on the wind. From stories carved in stone. From songs that echo through canyons. Sometimes, the future is hidden in the past. So, as we close this journey, remember this. America's lost indigenous technologies were never truly lost. They are waiting. Waiting for those who will listen. Waiting for those who will honor. Waiting for those who will act. And the question remains. Will you be one of them?